Elizabeth Holmes built a $9 billion company promising to spot hundreds of diseases in one drop of blood, and none of it worked. Real patients pricked a finger at the pharmacy and got results screaming cancer or HIV, faked by a machine that couldn't run one real test. So how does a college dropout con America's most powerful men out of billions? Let's rewind to Palo Alto, 2003, and a teenager in a black turtleneck out to fool the world. Fast forward 20 years and that same woman is sitting in a federal courtroom in San Jose, pregnant, silent, watching a jury decide the rest of her life. The wonder child of Silicon Valley, the one they called the next Steve Jobs, was about to be branded a common fraud. But to understand how she ended up in that chair, you first have to understand how she got everyone in America to stand up and clap for her. Because before the fall, there was the show, and it was a very good show. Meet Elizabeth Holmes. Stanford, class of nobody because she dropped out at 19. Most teenagers quit college to sleep until noon and play video games in a basement. Elizabeth quit to cure the world. She had one phobia, needles, and one obsession, becoming a billionaire, and she decided to solve the first in order to cash in on the second. Her pitch was simple and gorgeous. No more giant scary needles. No more vials of blood. Just one tiny prick of your finger, one drop, and a little machine would test you for hundreds of diseases in minutes, right at the corner drugstore. She named the company Theranos, and she named the dream healthcare for everyone. And she looked the part. She wore a black turtleneck every single day like she'd raided Steve Jobs' closet and refused to give it back. She spoke in a deep, slow baritone that former employees swear was fake, a voice she seemed to switch on like flipping a radio dial. She barely blinked. She just stared, wide-eyed and certain, straight through you, and people ate it up. Investors didn't hear a business plan. They watched a movie and she was the main character, and everybody wanted a ticket. So how does the machine actually work? That part's proprietary, I can't share it. But it does work. It's going to change the world. And somehow in that room that was enough. Then came the covers. Forbes, Fortune, Inc. She was crowned the youngest self-made female billionaire on the planet, worth $4.5 billion on paper, her face plastered on magazine racks like a rock star. And the board of directors she assembled, it wasn't doctors, it wasn't scientists. It was a wax museum of American power. Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, a former Secretary of State, General James Mattis, two former Secretaries of Defense, senators, admirals. It was less a medical advisory board and more the Avengers of men who used to run the country. And when Henry Kissinger personally vouches for your blood machine, who in the room is going to raise a trembling hand and ask if the thing actually works? Nobody. That's who. Which brings us to the tiny little problem sitting at the dead center of the $9 billion empire. The machine didn't work. They named it the Edison, after Thomas Edison, which is a bold branding choice when your invention is basically a light bulb that won't turn on. Inside the box was a single robotic arm that was supposed to run every test in the world on that one magic drop of blood. In reality, it could barely run a tiny handful of them. And the few it did attempt, it frequently got wrong. Here's the science, translated for anyone who has ever poured a little extra water into the ketchup bottle to make it last one more week. A drop of blood from your fingertip is tiny. To run dozens of different tests, you need far more liquid than a single drop can give you. So the Theranos did the dumbest thing imaginable. They watered the blood down. They diluted it, sometimes several times over, just to stretch it thin enough to smear across the machine. And when you dilute a medical sample that much, the results turn into pure garbage. It's like dumping one shot of espresso into a swimming pool and then trying to tell a stranger exactly how much caffeine is in their cup. You physically cannot. The number is a guess wearing a lab coat. But here is the part that turns bad science into outright fraud. When the Edison couldn't do the job, which was almost always, Theranos secretly ran the patient's blood on ordinary commercial machines. Machines built by Siemens. The exact same boring, reliable analyzers humming away in every hospital lab in America, the very machines Elizabeth swore up and down she was making obsolete. They hid them in a locked back room like a dirty secret. So the revolutionary miracle box was really a magician's cabinet. And behind the velvet curtain, a plain old store-bought machine did the trick, badly, on watered-down blood. So the Edison isn't actually running this test. No, we're running it on the Siemens. The Siemens, the machine we told investors we made obsolete. Lower your voice and keep walking. And yet the money kept pouring in, because the story was always so much better than the science. In 2013, Theranos landed the deal that made it a genuine household name. Walgreens. Wellness centers built right inside real pharmacies, where regular people could walk in off the street and get their blood tested next to the cough syrup aisle. And Walgreens was so terrified of missing out on the next Apple that they signed the deal without ever forcing Theranos to prove the machine worked in Walgreens' own laboratory. That is like buying a used car purely because the salesman has great hair and refusing to pop the hood in case reality ruins the mood. Their own consultant literally warned them the technology looked fake. Shouldn't we test one of these machines in our own lab first? If we stall, Google or Apple grabs them instead. So we just trust it, sign the deal. They signed anyway. The valuation detonated to $9 billion. Elizabeth's personal slice was roughly half of that, making her a paper billionaire several times over. She flew private. She traveled with a phalanx of bodyguards who called her by a code name. She got mentioned alongside Edison and Jobs in the same breath, in the same sentence, on the same stage. But inside the building, it felt less like a hot startup and more like a religion with a security badge. Employees were siloed off from each other, forbidden to discuss their own work with the person sitting 3 feet away. Ask one too many questions, and you'd find your badge deactivated by lunch. Running the enforcement was a man named Ramesh Balwani, who everybody called Sonny. He was the company president, and he was also, very quietly, Elizabeth's live-in secret boyfriend, a small detail that the world-class board of directors somehow never managed to learn. Sonny ruled by fear. He tracked exactly how many hours people spent in the building. He screamed. He threatened. He treated any scientist with a shred of doubt like a traitor to the cause. Imagine your boss reading your text messages, timing your bathroom breaks, and reminding you daily that he can vaporize your entire career with a single phone call. That was an average Tuesday at Theranos. I ran the test 3 times and the numbers never match. Then you're the problem, not the machine. But the data is telling me. Do you want to still work here tomorrow? Fear was the culture. Silence was the actual product. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. And it all started with a handful of people brave enough to whisper. Inside the company worked a young scientist named Tyler Schultz, and he watched the fraud happen up close, right at the lab bench. He saw them cherry-pick the good data and quietly toss out the results that made the Edison look like the failure it was. And Tyler carried a very inconvenient last name because his grandfather was George Schultz, the legendary elder statesman who sat on Theranos' own board of directors. So Tyler went to his own grandfather with the ugly truth, and his grandfather, utterly hypnotized by Elizabeth, took her side over his own flesh and blood. Picture Thanksgiving dinner where you calmly explain to your family that the company is a fraud, and your family tells you to write the CEO an apology. Grandpa, I've seen it in the lab. The whole thing is a fraud. Elizabeth tells me you're just confused. I run the tests. I'm not confused. That girl is going to change the world, Tyler. Tyler still refused to back down. He became a whistleblower, and Theranos unleashed its army of lawyers on him until his parents nearly went bankrupt just defending their son. Then came the reporter, John Carreyrou, A dogged investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal caught a tip that something was deeply rotten in Palo Alto. He started gently pulling on the thread. He tracked down former employees, terrified people who had signed non-disclosure agreements thick enough to stop a bullet. He found the diluted samples. He found the hidden Siemens machines in the back room. He found the doctors and the patients who had received wildly, dangerously wrong results. And that last part is exactly where this story stops being funny, because these were never just numbers glowing on a screen. A pregnant woman was told she might be losing her baby. Patients were told they might be carrying HIV. One woman got a result telling her she was on the verge of a stroke. All of it spat out by a machine that fundamentally could not do the job. The lie wasn't just financial anymore. It now had a body count measured in panic and midnight phone calls. In October 2015, Carreyrou published his bombshell. The headline hit the valley like a wrecking ball through a glass wall. Elizabeth marched onto television to fight back, deploying that deep, steady, unblinking voice, calling the entire investigation a pack of lies from bitter, disgruntled ex-employees. "This is what happens when you work to change things," she said, chin up. "But you cannot cross-examine a blood test, and you cannot outstare a regulator with a clipboard." The federal inspectors moved in on the labs and were genuinely horrified by what they saw. They banned Elizabeth from owning or running a lab for 2 years. Walgreens sprinted for the exit and shut every last wellness center. The $9 billion valuation collapsed to zero, faster than you could say disruptive innovation. So who paid the bill? For once in these stories, it was the rich and the powerful who got soaked. The list of investors who threw money at the turtleneck reads like a billionaire garage sale. The Walton family, the heirs to the Walmart fortune, poured in around $150 million. Rupert Murdoch, the media emperor himself, sank in $125 million and watched it evaporate, though he was at least shrewd enough to sell his worthless shares back to the company for $1 single to claim the tax write-off. The DeVos family, the Cox family, name an American dynasty, and there's a good chance they lost a fortune. Roughly $700 million of investor money, simply gone. Turns out that having Henry Kissinger on your board is not remotely the same thing as having a machine that works. And Elizabeth herself. In 2018, she and Sonny were both criminally charged with massive fraud. The trial dragged on through 2021 and into 2022. Her defense team tried to shove the blame onto Sonny, even alleging that he had controlled and abused her for years. The jury sat and listened to months of it. And in January 2022, they came back and found Elizabeth Holmes guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. The wonder child of Silicon Valley was now a convicted felon. That November, a judge sentenced her to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Sunny Balwani was convicted separately and handed nearly 13 years. The young woman who was going to change the entire world traded her black turtleneck for prison khaki. So here is what Theranos actually teaches you, and it turns out it's not really about blood at all. It's about the story. Elizabeth Holmes barely understood the science she was selling, but she understood something far more valuable and far more dangerous. People don't invest in machines. They invest in main characters. She handed a room full of billionaires, generals, and statesmen exactly what they secretly craved. A young genius in a turtleneck who let each of them feel like they were personally funding the future of humanity. And they wanted that feeling so badly that not one of them ever insisted on the single boring thing that would have ended the whole charade in one afternoon. Test the machine. Just once. Test the machine. She spent a decade promising that a single drop of blood could reveal the deepest truth about your body. And in the end, the only truth that drop of blood ever revealed was how easily the smartest people in the room will swallow a beautiful lie, right up until the exact moment it becomes literally unbelievable. So the next time a founder is selling you a miracle that nobody is allowed to open up and inspect, ask the only question that ever really mattered. Does the machine actually work? Because a good enough story can raise $9 billion. It just can never, ever pass a blood test.